Good morning, everybody. It's great to be back after 3 years. And this morning's panel is going to discuss free-to-air TV and its role in a crisis. Now, when I found out about this panel, I was invited to moderate it. I thought to myself, free-to-air, crisis, and two things automatically sprung to mind. First of all, obviously COVID. Secondly, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But of course, we always live in times of crisis. I remember going back to the 60s. There were crises there, left, right, and center. Back in the 80s, 90s, and say 15 years ago, there was a global financial crisis. So we're continually living in crises. And free-to-air broadcasting's role is obviously quite critical in this, especially in times of where its credibility seems to have been undermined by fake news or accusations of fake news. But anyway, we have a very interesting discussion hopefully lined up. And so I'd like to first of all start off by introducing the panel, after which we'll dive straight in to discuss a couple of the main crises I mentioned. And that's COVID and then the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That'll be followed by a more general discussion about other crises the world is facing and how they're reported by free-to-air broadcasters, obviously one of them being the crisis in the environment, and finally wind up by actually finding out ways in which these crises can be actually addressed and how free-to-air broadcasters can improve their coverage and also gain credibility. So anyway, without further ado, let me start off by introducing the panel. And in each case, I'd like the person to tell me something about themselves and their company. So immediately to my left, we have Robert Sveb, who is the General Director of Croatian TV. Robert, perhaps tell us a little bit more about yourself and your company.
Good morning. Thanks for having me here. I represent Croatian Radio Television. We are a public media service in Croatia. We operate 5 TV channels and 12 radio channels, numerous websites. And we are proud to provide a public remit, which is, comparable for the public financing we are receiving from the Croatian public.
Okay. Next is Matthias Tetele, who is a General Director, TV Markisa, and a member of the board, editorial board at CME. Matthias.
Yeah, Markisa is the leading TV group in Slovakia. We have 4 channels, we have several apps, and we also started streaming service with more than 100,000 subscribers already. And in my second role, I'm overseeing the news in all 6 CME countries. Croatia joined this week. So there is also some side job which I have to discuss with the chief editors in each country about editorial policy.
Okay. Next, Gregoire Pollard, who is the Director General of the Association of Commercial TV and Video on Demand Services in Europe. Gregoire.
Well, thanks for having me, and congrats everybody for making the morning session. I hear it was quite the party last night. Yes, as the name indicates, we are the association and voice of television and VOD services in Brussels, often referred to as the lobbying arm of the TV and VOD industry. And clearly this topic is of relevance to us. We're keenly invested in maintaining the value of news. Our members, there are 28 members, 28 of the largest and medium-sized media groups covering Europe. And they are a mix of free-to-air, pay TV, and of course streaming. So we look at this essentially from a legislative approach, but of course we take into account societal and economic factors. Thank you.
Okay, and finally we have Natalia Gorszczak, who is the Vice Chair of the EBU TV Committee. Natalia.
Yes, I am employed at RTV Slovenia. I'm ex-director of the program. In the EBU TV committee, we oversee the work of public televisions who joined EBU, and we try to do the strategy of the work of the free-to-air televisions, mostly, for example, regarding also the main topic like war in Ukraine and the programming part.
Okay, fine. So let's dive in without going specifically yet into the crises I mentioned, i.e. COVID and Ukraine. How, in fact, do you see the role of free-to-air TVs in a crisis? Can it be objective? what is in fact objective reporting and fake news, the issue of fake news. Can perhaps somebody start off? Robert?
Yeah, I mean, so being a public media service, it's, from our experience, it's well shown that when the crisis is, people are tending to return back to the public media service provider. So this was shown during the COVID, but then in Croatia, also in the middle of the lockdown, we had two very damaging earthquakes. So one was in city center of Zagreb, and then 10 months later in the region of Banija. It was really devastating, and so when people are sitting at home fearing of COVID and with all the media coverage and the government restrictions, and when you face the earthquakes, when people are getting into more level of fears, it was really shown how HRT actually with the radio and television was actually here for public, and people tend to turn, and we were really doing our best to cover as much as we could. So same happened recently with the war in Ukraine, when this invasion started. Actually, our ratings went up, significantly.
Right.
So, yeah, objective, of course, as a professional journalists, we and editors, we are trying to be as objective as possible and keeping the professional, two-side approach. But in crisis, I would dare to say it's not always possible to keep this kind of, because there are some obvious things, like, for example, in COVID crisis or during the earthquakes,
Yeah.
what the values we have to stand for as a media.
Yeah. Well, CME Matthias has got a presence in 5-6 markets in Central and Eastern Europe.
Markets, yeah.
6 markets now, obviously with Croatia now added to the list. How do you see the whole issue of objective reporting? And
I think it's important that the journalists, that we stay fact-based, but this is attacked by politics, since Trump started with it and many other leaders followed. Facts are not automatically given. And of course, in war times, it's difficult even to find out what are the facts. But this is the one route what we want to stay. We want to stay fact-based. I don't say objective or neutral. We want to stay fact-based. And the other thing is, it's under the name constructive journalism, because we have social media, we have online, and they are so fast, and each gossip is, each hoax, each wrong information, each right information is distributing so fast. So that's for the classic TV part in our business. We must bring an additional value. This is the context, this is explanation, these are graphics, these are own sources, own correspondence. So this we must deliver, otherwise we are not relevant anymore. So this is the challenge for us in a time which is quicker and quicker to give the context and the quality, and this is the main challenge for our journalists. Yes, we have also strong social media presence and online presence, but of course TV business is still a backbone. But you must deliver something. When the main news starting, people have seen all the videos during the day already, so you must create some additional value. And it's not so easy when the society is divided. We will talk about that later. COVID and war also led to societies with very conflicting camps, and free-to-air can try to bridge it, but it's not easy. We are not leading the society, we are a function of society and show what society is. But I think that's important, fact-based journalism and constructive journalism, giving the broader context.
as a very quick side question, do you find any major differences in the 6 markets you operate in terms of the way you approach to news coverage?
For the new country, I cannot say, but for the other countries, we are very similar because many years we had Time Warner as one of our owners, and we try to have a similar philosophy, but the countries are different. Romania is a strong news country, a lot of news channels, and so it's not always the same, but we are sending correspondents to the war, we make extra show, we make special, we really try to cover the things, and in 4 of the 6 countries, we are the leading channel and partly substituting the public channels, which are not so strong in our countries due to communistic heritage. So, but I think we have very similar editorial line, but the news has a different, let's say, priority depending on the market. So some are news gossip markets and other are more conservative traditional countries.
Okay. Greg, ACT's perspective on this, on objective reporting?
Yeah, of course. Well, we look at this, of course, at a European level, right?
Yeah.
I'd say the key operative word is trust, and what drives trust. If you look at the statistics that are compiled by Eurostat every 2 or 3 years on this, you'll see that TV and radio come up as the most trusted sources of information across the European Union. Over 50% most of the time. And then you have, way down the line, social media, search engines, and the rest. So what is driving that is, and we've seen that clearly in COVID, where all of the CEOs of the channels I represent have reported viewers coming back massively, notably to free-to-air, because there is this trust, because viewers know that they have a regulated media in front of them. And no matter, how much we like to sometimes say, well, regulation is bad, et cetera, we'd like to be able to develop our market as commercial players, there is that very strong aspect that with regulation comes trust. And we've seen, how viewers appreciate that. The key challenge is when indeed you are being challenged by so-called media, which are not real media, such as social media, who kind of blur the lines, right, between what people see as information that has been verified, that goes through journalistic standards, etc., and it's kind of hearsay or rumors or things that go viral very quickly. And therefore, in order to maintain that trust in the institution that is the media and that has to strive to kind of have a balanced view on events, and as Matthias was saying, is difficult, right? It's not always easy to keep that balance, but that's our role. We need to be supported in doing that, and we need to be able to have a level playing field that ensures that whoever is benefiting from disinformation, for example, is subject to the same rules that we are subject to, so as to ensure that we raise collectively the level and the bar for trusted information, rather than have to compete in this nebulous environment.
Okay. What about the EBU's perspective, Natalia?
Well, Greg was looking at me when he said media, because we had an interesting discussion before regarding, is the social media really media? In the old time, media was a regulated source of information. Is Facebook and Twitter and other Instagram, Snapchat and other things, I'm by purpose saying other things, saying are those media? It's like it's a cheat chat platforms, and what we do wrong is that we take the statements from the Twitter, from the Facebook, and we publish them in our media, and we give them too much of the importance. This is our big fault, and journalism has changed a lot since the social media appeared. Why? Because organized trolls attacked certain journalists, certain really investigative journalists, and it's like in the human nature that people are started to self-censor themselves. So I think so-called social media have brought a lot of pressure on journalists, because they want to be, they are not first anymore. somebody else tells something on the Twitter or on the Facebook, but on the other hand, you need then to analyze and to do the other things. Beside that, you are all the time under the pressure. And I think the responsibility which nowadays journalists, especially in the free-to-air media, have is enormous. And then there is additional rise of the populism in all the countries, and pressure is getting even higher. So I think we all need to, in fact, invest in our journalists much more, meaning to give them more time, because on the other hand, we are pushing journalists to work more, to do more stories, and to be fast, to have the accurate information, but they don't have time.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that we as entities, we look into each other and to check what we do right or wrong, because sometimes, in this push to be the first, to do the best, we do a lot of wrong things.
So I suppose that's an insight or beginning into how to maybe establish some of the credibility that you may have lost through social media. I get the impression from what the initial comments are that, first of all, people do turn to free-to-air TV in times of crisis for information, but on the other hand, there's perhaps been a loss of credibility in the public. Otherwise, they wouldn't be turning to social media. How can you address that? How can you actually win back that credibility?
Well, I think we
Sorry.
Yeah, I thought it was more additional question. I think we are losing slowly credibility, but not because of the social media being the first, but we are losing it because we are not doing our job on the right level. We are not investigating enough. We are not, we are too easily taking sides. And I think the last few crises has shown us that we have taken sides.
Yeah, we'll discuss
which is
that.
not okay, because we are there to give the information, and then there is a viewer, then there is our user who will, from all the information will have his opinion. This is what I call democracy.
Robert, you wanted to come in on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment, because yesterday during the one of the sessions, one of the speakers mentioned something like public media service or free-to-air concept, are dinosaurs who are going to die soon, So, I mean, there is a bit of truth to that, but I don't think entirely, because the concept of old-fashioned broadcasters are in a way are not very easy to adapt to the fast changes of the media landscape, and that's our problem there, where we have to work more on that to return this credibility incomparable to the other sources, or actually the flood of information across the internet. So we have to adapt to that, and we have to rise to the high level of professionalism in terms of journalism. On the other side, when it comes to regulation, I think this is like a century-old battle across the Atlantic concepts of a commercial approach to media in the US, and our bit more conservative approach in Europe, where we started with public media services and more like regulated concept. But then it comes internet, and then these technology giants are actually dictating the game. And in my humble opinion, I would say we lost this battle years ago. So nobody will dare to regulate the internet. At least I don't think they will. So we will keep having more flooding of the disinformation or fake news or any kind of, of getting the eyeballs on different platforms which are not and will not be regulated. So which puts us in a position that I think, it was never more important to have a quality and professional journalism in regulated media, in mainstream media, because people need some place where to go and check what's true, what's not true, where to believe, and how to build.
I think you wanted to say something there, Greg, as well.
Yeah, no, I just want to come back on a couple of points. First of all, on free-to-air, I think at the end of the day, you are going to need a diversity of offerings, right? If we look at the economic picture, purchasing power throughout Europe, not everybody is going to be able to have a VOD subscription. Not everybody is going to be able to get a pay TV subscription. So that offering is very important. And it's also important towards the diversity and pluralism that we want in media. There are absolute truths, of course there are. But most of the time you're best informed if you go on a number of different, just like you would buy different newspapers to get different points of view. That helps inform your view. It helps build your critical thinking. It's essential that we have that pluralism. Where we get into trouble is when people start basically finding themselves in so-called echo chambers and live there, and they don't move out. That's where we have a problem, where they're literally in a gated environment where that becomes their entire real perspective on reality. And I do have to respectfully a little bit challenge your point of view on we're not doing our job. I think we are, and I think that's why in times of crisis, as I was saying, people come back to free-to-air TV and other players, because that's where they know that there are at least some safeguards there. Yeah. And it's quite important that that role continues, and I do think we can fight misinformation. We are doing it. If you look at what's happening at European level, I know it's slow, I know it's frustrating, but there are moves towards fighting disinformation and making sure that basically those giants that are Google and Facebook learn the eternal lesson, which is there are three known truths that are inevitable: death, taxes, and regulation.
Matthias?
I think the challenge is that also politics took over with populism and extremist parties. So there is some group who are against vaccination, there is some group who supports Russia, and they don't have their space in traditional media, and they focus on social media, and some parties decided to go that route and take this part of the population with them. And many people, they believe what they read from their friends or what is forwarded as a link to them. So some people we don't reach, and we must be honest to ourselves. There is a big distrust of some part of our countries to traditional media, and this is the challenge, to win them back, or at least to keep the society open, because the polarization was extreme with Corona, and it continues with the war and the politics. Should we make embargo on oil and gas and all these topics? So the society, the gaps are deep, and as we are mainstream mass media broadcaster, our tendency is to unite the nations and address all of them. But this is a challenge which is getting more and more difficult, because on the one side we want to stay fact-based and stay out of this, let's say, fake news, but on the other hand, many people believe into that or are building their own world. So there is some tension, and that's why our environment has changed. But we are not making the society, we are just one function of society, and there's politics, there's social media, there are some movements, and all together give the picture, and we must be flexible and open-minded. How can we overcome this? How can we train people? How can we say, okay, we give you equality, trust us, but we must work for this. It is not given that in 5 or 10 years we are still here and still most trusted. So really we must work on that, and that's a challenge for all of our journalists.
Yeah, we have a lot to discuss here. We haven't even moved on to COVID and Ukraine yet. But just let me leave a final thought with you before we do that, and that is that perhaps news has something of an older viewer ring about it, and the people perhaps you should be aiming to catch are actually younger viewers. And there's also a huge emphasis in this, the space, the TV industry we inhabit, on entertainment, and news isn't really seen as sexy, especially amongst younger viewers, who, if they're interested in anything, will in fact turn to social media. Perhaps maybe leave that as a thought for you, maybe to discuss later on in the conversation. But let's perhaps move on to COVID now. Can you perhaps tell me, and I think you actually, Greg, you had a little video to show us as well?
Yeah, I mean, if they're available to show.
How you covered the COVID crisis?
Well, I mean, how personally, we basically looked at European responses to that. But if you look at members, and I hope we can show a little bit of that clip, we asked CEOs basically from our membership to give a little bit of their responses to how they tackled COVID. And I think one of the powerful messages that comes across there, which is surprising, right, if you grew up in the 80s with the rise of commercial TV and how for many people at the time, you know, the rise of commercial TV was seen as, oh my God, these guys are going to destroy information, they're going to destroy the general nation narrative that we have. How commercial TV has come such a long way to now become almost on par with public service media in terms of providing that service in that trusted environment. And that was one of the big takeaways I got there, as well as, of course, the continued investment and the challenges brought about by global platforms. But I don't know if we can watch part of it.
Can we see this video?
The first thing really was people, and the second thing then was balance sheet.
We understood as never before the importance and the role of a commercial television in a modern democracy.
People came back to, you know, the cornerstones of our culture.
A true icon of resistance against the coronavirus.
Huge paradox. People were watching television. However, our advertising revenues dropped substantially.
Ad sales was a bit of a very unpleasant and rapid shock.
COVID simply accelerated the structural change already in place.
How do you move from a mass media to a targeted medium?
Digital world offers a lot of opportunities, but it also offers different competitive circumstances.
We are now officially facing global platforms.
We expect a lot from the future works like the Digital Services Act and all the new competition tools and democracy action plans.
Future-proof intellectual property.
Future-proof, functional and fair audiovisual policy.
The fake news, the hate speech.
That has to be regulated. That no one is going to willingly do this.
The time of self-regulation is over.
What's at stake here is the preservation of variety in the media ecosystem.
Okay, thanks for that. Natalia, what's your view on the way the COVID crisis was covered?
Well, public service media has done has played a substantial role in the COVID crisis. All the public service media in Europe have raised their ratings in the time of COVID. The trust in the public service was really high. So we have proven that we are still the very important players on the market and that public service media is very important. I think also commercial television should be aware that if they lose public service media, they will also lose a role model for their journalism. So I think it's really this cohabitation of the public service media and commercial TV is really very important because we influence each other. We do our job, you know, we fulfill our journalistic role in democratic role. In fact, there was an EBU research done in 2016, the role of the public service media in democracy, and it was clearly visible that the countries with a very, very developed public service media, with strong public service media, have a very high level of democracy. So I think this should be also something that, you know, commercial TVs should support. And on the second thing regarding COVID, I think what we didn't do good, you know, I'm always looking, you know, what we can improve. We had, like, for example, in front of RTV Slovenia, demonstration for 3 or 4 months of the anti-vaxxers. I constantly was talking to them, you know, calming down, telling them, what we said about, the other side of the story. But the truth is that we didn't investigate what they were doubting. They were doubting if the vaccines were tested well, the side effects which were there. And this is what we didn't talk about, and we didn't fulfill our task. So people were angry, they were protesting. So until we were discussing to them, they were calm. But in the moment that nobody discussed with them, they attacked, for example, our public service media. So it was really difficult. But I think COVID was a really a big test for every media, and we can learn a lot out of COVID. Mm-hmm. And now, when war in Ukraine is going on, we also need to see what we report on. We already took a side. Okay, we are with victims, but do we show all the sides of the story?
Yeah, more balanced.
I think our role is not to take a side. Yeah. Our role is to say, as Matthias said, to show all the facts, all the information, and then, it's up to
Do you feel there was a certain degree of news management as well? No, I'll give you a specific example, something I actually mentioned to you. When Omicron actually appeared, well, obviously we all follow the news closely. One day, nobody had heard about it. The next day, everybody had heard about it.
Yeah, but the joke, we say that the one who won the war against COVID is Putin. Because in the moment when Putin attacked Ukraine, we stopped talking about COVID. Yeah. And we even don't know that in China they're having the epidemic of Omicron. We don't talk about that.
Well, let's talk about Ukraine shortly. We actually are running out of time a bit. So perhaps maybe, Mateusz, you could tell us how you approach the COVID.
But if you see, for example, in the country where I work in Slovakia, in Bratislava, which is very Western, modern, rich region, 85% are vaccinated, and the mainstream is there. Okay, let's vaccinate and go for it. But on the countryside, in the east, there's below 30% vaccination, and there's stronghold of, let's say, old socialists. They are pro-Russia, they are against vaccination, they are against establishment. So then suddenly we have two different paces in society, and I'm sure our mistake was not to integrate also the voices and to be too clear on one side. Probably yes. And this is it's accelerating with social media, because you cannot capture all the wrong information, and that's the situation in many countries, that you have really extreme poles in the side. But I think we learned our lessons from both the war and COVID, to be more active and really to make transparent where is our information coming from and how are the sources. And there's still a long way to go.
I think one thing, just let me bring this one thing up, actually, in reporting of COVID, there's a pro-vax and the anti-vax argument, which we all know quite clearly, but there's also something which hasn't really been touched on in reporting, most reporting, and that is preventative measures, what one can do to one's own health, improve one's own health. That was mentioned initially, actually, in, say, UK, for instance, but then it was completely run off the agenda, so it's either pro or anti. But anyway, Robert, how did you approach the COVID issue?
First of all, I would link to what Matthias said before about the split of society into camps, definitely, and this is shown on every topic we can talk about, even COVID, but also war in Ukraine. So seems like society took like on every question we are generating kind of political movement, which is for us as a responsible media, it's very difficult to cover, because on some points, you are not allowed not to take sides, but professionally you should not take sides, and it's what I think, where we failed covering the COVID, although we were very important and we did, our best and people, trusted public media service during this. But with the split of society, we failed to tell the story, which is educational, informational, and entertaining in a way, so people can accept and then think about it. Because when society splits to half, both sides take very hard positions, and the dialogue is very hardwired. So our job is to bring them together by telling story, and this is where we are failing big time, I think. So we somehow forgot to tell a good story, which will then inspire people to start thinking about different, sides and approaches. COVID was one example. War in Ukraine is a bit more. It's a higher issue, I would say.
Yeah.
Because this is like questions. We do lots of internal debates, about this, and it's. What's political movement? I mean, let's say there are we all know that there are many other crises we have to start talking about. But if we will go in a way that allow to generate political movement on each question, then we might come to the fundamentals. Like, would 2 + 2 be 4? So shall we? Generate political movement.
Just moving on briefly to Ukraine, because obviously that is the big crisis at the moment. And they say that in war, truth is always the first casualty. And as we can see in the reporting of Ukraine, of the war, rather, should I say, it's very much pro-Ukraine in the West. And in Russia, there's certainly a very different take on things. And we have, say, certain anomalies, for instance, like we have Eutelsat broadcasting Russian channels to Russia, supposedly with propaganda, pro-Russian propaganda on them. So a strange situation really exists. How have you all approached the coverage of the war in Ukraine? And is there anything you could be doing better? Is it possible to be objective in a situation like this?
If I may, I think it's simply not possible to take a kind of bias in this, approaching to this story. So, for example, from our point of view as Croatians, having the war here in this region only 30 years ago. So if you remember that 30 years ago there was a shelling of this beautiful city, taking place, that people were living in the basements and everybody were in fear for their lives, then looking this, from the Ukraine perspective, it's simply we cannot be objective, in a way that understand the Russian side. So automatically we take Ukraine side because we feel that, So that's, I think it's, and also it's a kind of natural, So you can be better, of course. It's always a place for a maneuver. But when it comes to these things like the invasion, we are living in 21st century. We have to worry about climate change, because this is important for all of us.
This is another issue. This is another crisis, which I think I was actually going to ask you, because COVID and Ukraine, you're adopting a reactive approach to coverage because these events are happening, are happening. Whereas environment, for instance, the crisis in the environment, maybe broadcasters should be adopting a more proactive approach. But anyway, going back to Ukraine, say Matthias, how would you rate your coverage of...
I think we are good in capturing the human tragedy and tell people stories who have to leave their homes and so on. But of course, on the actual war scene, we don't know really what's going on. You get information from both sides, but you cannot verify them. So it's a special situation on this. And there's the political context in each country. Each country, should we support them? Should we bring weapons? Should we allow the transport of weapons through our country? So every of our markets has then some local political context which is overshadowing this, and each party tries to get some benefit out of this this discussion, and this is the context where we have to work. It's true, many informations we don't have, but we try to do the best to give the context. But each country has different. Slovakia has a border to Ukraine, and then there is different interest, or in Romania. So I think our journalists try to go into this context. Human stories, we are very good, but in the political, and there's also here you have the polarization.
Yeah,
that's the same.
Greg?
Well, I mean, covering conflicts is always very complicated, right? It's very expensive, first of all. Sending journalists, etc., is extremely expensive. Then you have a question of access, which is not always the case at the conflict zones. Then it comes down to the newsroom, right? And that's where editorial independence is key, and the newsroom's independence is key. And they make their decisions. Is it possible to be objective in this kind of conflict? It's very hard. Of course, it's very hard. But I think where TV gains trust and credibility is when it strives to be as much as it can be. And as I told you earlier, the big example that comes to my mind was, 40 years ago, the Falklands War, right? Where you had the BBC, and they're all kudos to the public service media, making reports about the Falklands War and clearly stating, Her Majesty's government is telling us this, the Argentinians are telling us this. And when you have that kind of objective treatment of information, I think it helps elevate the medium. I'm not saying I'm taking sides here. I'm thinking that's the medium. The role of the medium is exactly not to do that. It's to be able to report what is told. Then it has its own barriers to doing that. If you see what happened in the TV world, basically we had an injunction to not distribute, for those who were distributing, Russian channels in Europe. I mean, that was very clear. The rule came down, RT came down, etc. They're challenging that decision. We'll see where that goes. But clearly we are subject to that, so we have to deal with that. But the bigger point also is how we can help, and I see there's a lot of efforts going around, and including in this conference, to promote Ukrainian content and TV, and that's very important. And I think, as a community of broadcasters, that's what we have to do, is try and help those who are on the field, the Ukrainian broadcasters, through this. And clearly, there are we're at peak content. So it's a bit absurd, right? You have a lot of people who are trying to do production everywhere. They don't have the staff. There are great people who are coming out of Ukraine and who'd love to work. So, I'd really, encourage people to go to creative shelters, for example, which is a great initiative.
But we for example, hired some Ukrainian producers
there we go.
in our countries. They are very well qualified. And what it said, there's a young lady, she started yesterday. She's here with her 7-year-old son. And it's tough, but we really try to incorporate some of them.
And I think that's how you can show, because, money talks at the end of the day, right? That's how you can show your commitment to helping. It's not so much in the treatment of information. There you need to be careful. It's more about, well, yes, this is our industry. This is something that touches us. This is where we can help. So these kind of initiatives, I think, are where the industry speaks best in terms of taking a side. But on news, you have to be very careful because things are whimsical. They change, from one day to another. But you will always be fingered as saying, you took that position back in the day, therefore we can't trust you. You have to be very careful with that.
Natalia?
I would just point out one, question. What do we don't cover because we, concentrate too much on Ukrainian crisis? What is happening in Syria? What is happening with the Kurds, who we used to fight against the Islamic State, and now Turkish president wants to attack them, and we don't do anything on that. What is happening in Afghanistan, where people were left completely without any help? What's happening to the women in Afghanistan? And in fact, we jump from one story to another story, and we forget about everything else. I miss those, continuation of the stories to be told. I'm a news, enthusiast, and I'm trying to find the information about Syria.
it's not there.
It's not there, and it's our task to inform people. And for example, with the refugees from Ukraine, we concentrate to them. But what about all those poor people from Syria, Afghanistan, who are waiting in the asylum centers and they don't have any rights? Remember the guy, who was with Djokovic in Australia, 8 years, young boy. And we don't do anything on that. And I think and also when it was COVID, we forget about other subjects. And we forget about, basic, and also when we talk about climate crisis, we forget about, other topic. We are very much too populistic in our work. Sure. That's the problem. And I don't know who is the one leading the show with the news, but it looks like, we are all playing the same game.
Who sets the agenda?
Yeah.
Well, we're almost practically out of time. I was wondering whether anybody in the audience has any questions. Anyone? All satisfied? All enjoyed the session? Okay. Right, well, I think we're going to be winding up here now. So I just like to say thank you very much to the panel for a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.